This iconic show has put an end to the devious lives of several perverts, but the actions of one such sicko put an end to the show itself. Yes, as crazy as that sounds, the Dateline NBC's To Catch a Predator literally ended after this episode aired. But before that, let's take a look at this next predator who almost got the show canceled. This is no joke. I mean, this episode triggered some of the craziest reactions from viewers. Referring to the predator in question, one fan said, "How does someone do this type of thing twice in 24 hours? He's a danger to society. Lock him up for life." Another said, "How was this guy able to leave without being arrested?" All the predators are despicable, but this one is the worst.
What kind of conduct is this for a high school teacher?
None, sir. I've never done this before.
This sicko named John Kennelly went under the guise of Special Guy 29, but honestly, if you ask me, there was nothing special about him. If at all he was something, he was a creep of the highest order. We've seen predators who are really cautious before making their way into the sting house. They try to make sure everything looks safe and sound before going ahead with their dreadful plans. And that is exactly what Kennelly did as well. The cameras caught a middle-aged man in shorts pacing around the house. The very next shot, we see Kennelly taking his shirt off.
You know what would be really hot? Strip down your underwear in the garage and walk in.
Perhaps he wanted to change into something better, but no, because what this guy was up to is really alarming. Let's quickly recap how we got here in the first place. John Kennelly was lured into a chat by one of the decoys, and just as we expected, he was caught trying to have sex connotations with an underage boy, and these chats that led him to the trap were truly horrifying. While the very fact that he indulges in such an obscene conversation with a kid is enough reason to jail him, but the decoy plays along in an attempt to see how far he could go. During one such chat, a sort of joke seems to have transpired between the decoy and Kennelly, but the man was so blinded by his urges that he took it literally. While oftentimes, the decoy asked the predator to bring a few presents, like maybe some snacks, or video games, etc., etc. This time, the decoy had a somewhat strange request. The 23-year-old woman who was posing as a 14-year-old boy suggested to Kennelly that it would be more arousing if Kennelly arrived just in his underwear when he came to the house. But how this man who works at a high school replies is even more disturbing than you think. You just have to see how this conversation builds up.
"I don't wear underwear." So the decoy says, "Then come in naked."
Now, obviously the decoy was trying to pull his leg, but who knew that Kennelly would take this request seriously? With no idea that he has been caught in a trap, Kennelly arrives at the house and proceeds to strip inside the garage. Kennelly was sure of what was to follow once he was inside the house. So sure that this is how he showed up.
Oh,
Did this guy just show up stark naked? Forget me. None of them watching the CCTV footage could believe it. Not the decoy and not even Chris Hansen. And what's more, during the chats that took place between Kennelly and the decoy, there seems to have transpired a joke of sorts. But Kennelly is so blinded by his urges that he doesn't just take it as a joke. Kennelly didn't come empty-handed. He had a huge bag of presents he had brought along for the supposed young boy. This bozo was so shameless that he simply placed the bag on the counter and took a seat by the counter. It didn't bother him even for a bit that he was walking around buck naked in someone else's house. Kennelly then patiently proceeds to wait in his seat, expecting his young partner for the night to show up. But that is not what happens. You would think that a person would be startled by the sound of boots, but Kennelly had so many things running inside his filthy head that he didn't notice Hansen pulling up behind him. It was only when Hansen spoke up that Kennelly realized he had been busted.
Could you explain yourself?
I'm sorry.
Shocked to see Hansen, a flustered Kennelly tried to cover himself before sitting down and talking. Kennelly surprisingly seemed pretty apologetic for his actions, and even told Hansen that the decoy had texted him asking to come over. Clearly, Kennelly had no idea who Hansen was, since he assumed the well-dressed man must have been the boy's father. Hansen decides to play along and asks him how his son had texted Kennelly to come over buck naked, but Kennelly tries to beat around the bush. When Hansen asked him for his age, Kennelly revealed that he was 29 years old and worked as a school bus driver. This is gut-churning, because a school had actually hired a predator to work for them. When Hansen puts forward more questions, the real truth comes out that Kennelly was not a school bus driver, but a teacher at the local school. This makes things even worse, since nobody knows how many children have already fallen prey to this disgusting man. With further investigation, Hansen finds out that Kennelly had been lying both times about his employment. Despite being unemployed at the time, he got busted. And now it was time for Hansen to ask the most pressing question, and the reply he got was absolutely unbelievable.
What would have happened, John, if I wasn't here?
I probably would have chickened out, sir.
Chickened out.
Chickened out? Did he just come here naked with 12 packs of beer to chicken out? But this guy was a born liar and a born pervert. Less than 24 hours later, Kennelly had not learned a single thing from his actions. With absolutely no regard to what had just transpired between him and Hansen, Kennelly was back to his antics. Oblivious to the fact that his chats were being monitored, Kennelly strikes a conversation with yet another underage child who he decides to meet with at a restaurant. Hansen and the camera crew were waiting for him at the location, and this is where he was cornered once again.
I just came to get something to eat.
John, we've been through this before. What are you doing? I've got the chat log again.
Stupid!
Sadly, back in the first season, which is when this episode aired, Hansen did not work closely with the cops, but despite the involvement of the police forces, this next Predator's actions put a hold on the show forever.
Well, ultimately, because of the suicide, the show got canceled.
Hansen and his team were surveilling the online accounts that they had created in order to trap predators, and while this was going on, a rather concerning individual made contact with the team. The involvement of a person who holds a high position meant that this episode would rack up millions of views, and so the team decided to go with it. But what they didn't know was that it would be their last predator that they were onto. The man in question is Lewis William Conrad Jr., a prosecutor in the state of Texas. And this man was no regular man of the law. He was the assistant district attorney. It's a mystery even to this day why a man with such a reputation would stoop so low as to try and indulge in such heinous acts, especially since the man had been a criminal defendant for the entirety of his career. But there is a very strong message we can all take home from this sting. There are perverts who turn out to be predators in all walks of life. No matter where you are and what you do, a pervert is gonna be a pervert till the end of his life. Now, since the man in question has dealt with criminal investigations all his life, the crew had to be extra careful so their cover isn't blown. And so, the decoy team managed to catch the attorney Lewis Conrad's attention thanks to a hired actor who pretended to be an underage boy. The chats go on for about 2 weeks, and within this time, Conrad has made contact at least every day with the decoy across several phone calls. Now, let us remind you, each and every conversation that went down during these illicit phone calls were not only recorded, but also being analyzed. As the two build a rapport and get comfortable, Conrad starts to reveal his filthy desires to the decoy. The prosecutor sent pornographic pictures to the decoy, and even spoke in a manner. The man even admitted that he would lie to see the boy masturbate. Again, let's not forget that the attorney was well aware that this boy he was talking to was an underage teen, but that did not keep him from building fanciful ideas in his head. To make sure they had the right lead and get the man punished, the decoy team were constantly in touch with the cops, and finally, they settled in on a day for the much-awaited meetup at the Sting House. But that's when Conrad senses something fishy. He got a whiff of doubt and almost immediately bailed on the chat. And how did the team discover this? On D-Day, the team had everything in place, from the cameras to the mics to the transcripts, and even the cops. Everybody was pumped to catch the high-profile predator red-handed. But guess what? Conrad never showed up. Okay, so considering this man held a high position, it's obvious that he was a busy man. So maybe he simply had a last-minute errand to make, or maybe he got delayed in court. Who knows? It could be anything. All they have to do is just set up a meeting all over again. But Conrad was not busy. He had fled. The man had deliberately given the meeting a miss. He had even deleted the online account he was using for this purpose. Basically, he had gone off the radar. But just as I said earlier, due to the high sensitivity of this issue, the legal authorities had to be involved right from day one. By the time Conrad had bailed, the police were already ready with an arrest warrant for him. Yes, the very fact that he indulged in conversations with a minor is enough reason to arrest him. And so, the cops managed to get a search warrant for his house, and it was now time for them to head out and make the arrest. The cops first surrounded Conrad's place and prepared themselves for the encounter. To ensure they don't intimidate him into fleeing away, they sent in an officer who he was already familiar with. But despite knocking for a while, there was no answer from inside the house. Although Conrad's personal devices were still turned on, looks like the cops would have to break in. The police then managed to get inside, and what follows is an absolute state of radio silence. And this lasted for 5 whole minutes. None of the cops who entered the building found any signs of life. But this is a concerning situation, as they had just a little while earlier confirmed movement inside the house. Well, this brings us down to the only possible explanation in the given scenario. Conrad had probably already fled the scene, but things were a lot worse in reality. When Lieutenant Adana Barber walked out of the building, she had some explanations to make, and just by her body and facial expressions, it was clear that this encounter did not end well. Tensions were high. Everyone was speculating about what could have happened inside the house. Did they arrest Conrad, or did he manage to flee? The suspense had reached a boiling point. Lieutenant Barber was burdened with the responsibility of sharing the nitty-gritty details of what had transpired inside the house. And so she went on to elaborate in great detail how the SWAT team had successfully infiltrated the building. She said,
"As they made entry, they confronted the suspect. I believe he was in the hallway, and he told them he wasn't going to hurt them. And then up in the head.
And he had a pistol in his hand.
Small caliber."
That's it. The 56-year-old was so ashamed of his actions that he decided to take his own life. But was it worth it? I guess we'll never know. Almost immediately, the emergency medical team arrived at the scene to examine the body and evaluate any chances of survival. Surprisingly, Conrad still held on to his dear life. He was then carried out in a stretcher and airlifted to the nearest hospital. And that was about it. A little while later, the assistant district attorney was pronounced dead. While that's definitely not the kind of end I would want for any predator, this side sent shockwaves across the political world, particularly in Texas. And guess who was blamed? NBC Dateline's most popular show, To Catch a Predator. The show was put under a lot of pressure from this point on, and Conrad's sister Patricia Conrad even filed a lawsuit against Dateline NBC for a large sum.
That was encouraged by an out-of-control reality show. I will never consider my brother's death a
At this point, the trigger was pointed towards the entire crew of the highly dramatic television show. When Hansen interviewed one of the officers involved in the case and asked him why they hurried with the arrest, he said,
"We didn't want there to be any more destruction of the records and evidence tampering things than what had already taken place."
But it looks like none of the precautions worked out, as the 3 computers that were found at Conrad's home were secured by ultra-complex security features. This meant none of the contents of the 3 retrieved hard drives were accessible. As for the case, it was eventually settled in 2008 by NBC, and this meant more harm for the show than you can imagine. NBC Dateline had to shell out $105 million in an out-of-court settlement to subdue Conrad's sister's lawsuit. But that was not it. The cops involved with the show were heavily criticized for improper execution of their duties. They were snubbed for being merely a player in the show and had no real law enforcement position. While on the other hand, NBC was criticized for leading police operations at the expense of safety and justice. And that is not even the worst consequence of Conrad's death. As for the lawsuit filed, none of the predators who were caught in the sting could be prosecuted. Different reasons were stated in all the arrests, and all the predators managed to escape justice. Can you believe that? All the cases against the predators caught over the 3 years of the show were dismissed. As for the star of the show, Chris Hansen, the TV host revealed in an interview that he had absolutely no regrets in the way the entire sting operation was handled.
It's a great show, and I have a lot of respect for Dan Abrams and the people involved in it, and go way back with him to our days at NBC.
According to Hansen, although the did have an effect on the show, it was not the reason for it being pulled off the channel. In an interview, he said,
The production became very expensive, and what NBC figured out is that they had a lot of material that could be repackaged, repurposed, and re-aired for many years to come.
To me, this looks like a major conspiracy. Probably just like Conrad, there was some other high-profile dude who was involved in getting dirty with underage kids. And before his truth is revealed to the world, he grabbed onto his opportunity and shut the entire thing down. Well, there are certainly more predators out there than you could ever imagine. I would definitely petition for the show to be back on the air. Don't you think it was a genius way to catch the predators? I'm leaving you at that. Thanks for watching, guys.